Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're so glad you're with us tonight as you're logging in. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture that brings you this program, the Parent Education Series, now in its 19th year. We are delighted to have with us tonight George Anders, who's the author of You Can Do Anything, The Surprising Power of a Useless Liberal Arts Education. This is going to be a great event with almost 500 of you registered. We know how timely this is, so we're in for a treat. Please join me, everyone, in a warm welcome for George Anders. Take it away, George.
Thank you so much, Charlene, and the whole organizing group for making this talk possible. This is a labor of love for me, as I'll show you once we get rolling on the slides. I come to you in three different incarnations. The first is as an author. The second is as a journalist and the writer of the Workforce Insights newsletter for LinkedIn for 4 years. But the third one is as a Bay Area parent. And not only do I understand what it is like to be in your shoes, I have been and still am in your shoes. So let me pull up the slides. I have maybe 15, 20 slides that we'll go through, and I'll explain what we're going to cover today. Okay, so you should be seeing something that says College Careers and You, Building Strategies for Stormy Times. If
Perfect.
it
Thank you,
says something,
George.
good. Okay, I always want to make sure that what I think I'm showing and what I'm showing are the same. So that's what we're the broad framework for what we're doing. And let's find out what gets me to the next slide. Minor surprise here. There we go. Okay. So as I said, author, economics writer, fellow Bay Area parent, and three sort of core beliefs that I want to put on the table. I hope they're welcome, but if they're seen as biases, I want to own up to them before we go too deep into this. First one is my belief that the liberal arts are a crucial part of our humanity, and that's always true. It's true whether English is the most popular major on campus, which was true 40 or 50 years ago, and it's true even today when students' priorities have at least apparently moved in a different direction. Second one is that skills and networks are just as important in determining how we succeed. I see the pendulum go back and forth. There are times where the world is very networking centered. There are times when the world is very skill centered. They both matter. And I'll take you through some thoughts on that in terms of the whole journey from being a teenager in high school to being a member of the workforce and how these two factors play together. And the third, which is personal, is letting go as a parent is both agonizing and essential. And I'm sure we all have moments where we wonder, are we too hands-on? Are we too hands-off? Having been through most of the journey, our kids are now in their mid-20s. I can say that there are moments when we got involved that I'm very proud of, but there are moments when we let go that, even though they were hard at the time, are special too. So that's just a little bit of the broad context. And now let me talk a little bit about what we're going to cover tonight. I've divided this into 5 areas. The first one is what's changed since we went to college. All of us are unique and actually quite excellent experts in our own college journey. But as I've learned the hard way, what was true when we were freshmen is not necessarily the world our students are going into. So I want to spend a little time going through a couple differences that are succinct and interesting. The second is some thoughts about how you get full value out of college today. College is partly the classes you take, but it's an awful lot more. It's partly the degree you get, but it's also a lot more. And we'll drill down into that. The third, and this grows out of my LinkedIn experience, is to look inside top employers' priorities. What are they looking for today? And we'll spend some time there. I'll get tactical for a little bit and talk about landing a good internship or job. This is something that I think we all pick up bits and pieces of it. I hope that, again, 6 years at LinkedIn gave me a ringside seat that adds some information and that I'm happy to share. And at the end, I'll pull back and talk a little bit about what does success really look like. Is it our GPA? Is it our salary? Is it something that goes beyond those two? And I've got a closing example that I think you'll get a kick out of that will help roll us into the questions. So away we go. So what's changed? I pulled up a list of what people were studying in 1996. I'm assuming that that's a good benchmark year for when a major part of our audience was in college or graduated. And then what's going on today, or as close to today as we can get, the government statistics do 2021 to 2022. So what do we see here? I mean, not only do we know that students today are on their smartphones, their attention span is shorter, they have far more elements competing for their attention, and they're born multitaskers. And of course, Chat GPT is always in the background, and the study aid that is much more than a study aid. So we know that. But what I also want to highlight is how what people are studying has evolved. Business has been the #1 major for a number of years. Last year, of the approximately 2 million people that got college degrees, 375,000 of them got business degrees. That was the most common choice. It's up 66% since 1996, which is substantial growth, but really in line with the overall growth. A lot more people are getting college degrees these days, and I'm sorry, it's jumped ahead. So that's notable. What's even more notable is the second one, health professions. And this can be kinesthesiology, this can be pre-med, this can be physical therapy programs. Far more of an emphasis now on college majors that will take you into careers in health. It's a booming field. And for those of us who are baby boomers, our insistence that we will never, never, ever get old is going to keep the health profession growing for the next few decades to a great degree. Biology is a very strong major. Philosophy, psychology is a strong major. We see the fastest growth rate on computer science and IT, but it's not one of the top 4 majors. It's a very demanding field, and it also tends to be one that some people will pick up on their own and have enough programming skills to get jobs in tech without necessarily having been a computer science major. The next one I really want to spend a little time on, multidisciplinary studies. We've seen a drop off in majors in pretty much the full sweep of the humanities and the classic liberal arts. People just are not majoring in English as much as they used to, and that's one of the few fields where it's down. But what I do see is the traditional liberal arts are rebounding as part of a multidisciplinary program. So our son graduated with a degree in cognitive studies. It's a very nice AI-friendly major, and he's finding that there are lots of AI-related companies that think that's who they want to hire. But what is it? It's a mashup of linguistics, psychology, computer science, and philosophy. It's 4 different ways of looking at how the brain works. And it brings in a tech component. It brings in other components as well. And I find this very heartening. We see something similar in environmental studies. We see some other multidisciplinary approaches. And I like that. It breaks down the traditional walls of different departments that have a narrow, deep view of the world and encourages students to see the world more broadly. So I would expect that number to keep going up. What else has changed? For me, at least, when I went to college, my parents were both immigrants. My dad had a difficult journey that eventually brought him to the US. They saw college as a path to stability. Learn a profession, get a steady job, you'll be able to work in the same field for a long time. That view predominated a generation ago. What I see now is that a college degree is actually a pathway to mobility. And there's some Bureau of Labor Statistics data that really points this out. If we take a look at how many jobs people hold between ages 22 and 28, which is what this slide shows. If you go at life with only a high school education, typically that translates into 4.7 jobs during those formative years in your 20s. If you have a community college degree, that bumps you up to 5.2 jobs. If you have a college, full-fledged 4-year university or college degree, you're up at 5.8 jobs. And what's going on here? Part of it is you're going to get more promotions with that higher education degree. You may enter as an assistant something, you'll become an associate and a full-fledged one, and that's true in many tracks. You also have the ability to move from field to field. A lot of people coming at the world with more limited education, they have their trade, they have their specialty. It's a little hard for them to move. It's much easier to move as a college student. So in fact, one of the examples that I want to share from the book, meet Polly Washburn. She is a graduate of Oberlin College, and she has had at least 5 careers in her life. So at the bottom left, you see Polly, the legal researcher. After a few years, that turned into Polly, the journalist. When she got an opportunity to start making movies, that turned into Polly, the filmmaker. As digital opportunities kept growing, she became Polly, the web developer. And the last I saw, she was Polly, the digital producer. So, same person. If you think broadly, these are all the kinds of skills in terms of making projects happen, gathering information, building it into a narrative, doing analytical skills. It draws on the same strengths of her, but it's 5 different ways of putting those skills to use. So, in the book, You Can Do Anything, I offer that very much as an example of how people can take a liberal arts degree and end up having multiple careers rather than just one. So let me move to the next area, which I'm calling finding full value from a college education. And I want to pull back a bit and look at how you earn a college degree globally. We're in an unusual place. We're one of the few leading economies where it takes 4 years to get a bachelor's degree or a BA or a BSc. Most other countries, either because of the continental European model or the British model that was spread around the world, do it in 3. And I worked for a few years in London, and I was struck that the people I met who had come out of college a few years earlier, much like me, we were all in our mid to late 20s then, um, they had picked their major and they pretty much took the courses that were assigned, and that's all they took. In 3 years, you're going to work through your requirements, and your requirements are your path to your degree, and there's very little room for electives. And there's nothing wrong with that. I know you have excellent educations in many of these countries. But at the same time, it narrows the way you see the world. And because we have that 4th year, it's much easier to weave in electives. And I want to go to town talking about electives for a few minutes. So I spend a little time on the web looking to see what are the most popular classes at a handful of the kinds of schools that we're proud to know that our kids are applying to, and hopefully they get into some of them. So in Pomona, what's a star elective? It's the physics of music. And I love the way it blends together a classic arts subject, music, and a classic STEM subject, physics. And, what makes high C, and, how do you tune it differently? You can go all kinds of places, but it's the kind of class that will stretch your mind and that will also give you the kinds of insights that make you a more fun person to be around, a better conversationalist, and very good at synthesizing different disciplines, which is truly valuable as you enter the world of work. A lot of times you're getting multiple ways of looking at a subject. These are the kinds of classes that inspire you. Yale, it's psychology and the good life. That's a very wonderful class. I've heard the instructor for it do guest talks for the Aspen Institute. And she does a great job of taking people through what we know about motivation, what we know about depression and overcoming it, what we know about setting goals. And it's a very interesting exploration of psychology on a practical level. Something you see at a lot of schools, the third one, Introduction to General Astronomy. I took a non-astronomy class, or non-technical astronomy class my freshman year. Stars are fascinating. What can I say? I mean, they're fascinating when you're 5 years old, and they're really fascinating for your whole life. And again, it's a chance to think big, very literally. The last 2 that I've highlighted, World History of Emotion in Santa Clara. I like history. We all have emotions. It's a nice mashup, very much like the physics of music. And these are really the kinds of things that you get from a college education that make it more than a trade school, that make it something that widens your whole horizons for the rest of your life, gives you a way to think, gives you place your curiosity, and helps you also feel that you're on the frontiers of knowledge. You're not just learning things that have been in a textbook for a long time. You're understanding where your instructors are researching and what they're doing. Dartmouth, the same thing. They use the classics as a way to learn close reading of text. Sometimes all you have is 450 words in Greek to tell you about an entire era. And you really have to look at what's not being said, what's being emphasized. It's a great way to learn close reading. And whether you go into law or many other fields, that ability to get everything you can out of a text is valuable. The other thing I want to highlight about these kinds of classes is you get your best instructors there. You get the people who are really gifted at presenting the whole sweep of a field, at conveying the excitement and the energy of a subject. There's a lot you can learn about public speaking watching a top tier lecturer. And in my own career, I've seen many leaders who have been able to rise pretty high, even with limited writing skills. I've seen some leaders who've risen quite high with limited mathematical skills. I've never seen anyone rise high without the ability to speak well and be persuasive and explain where the organization is going and to rally people to the cause. So it's never too early to get exposure to people who are absolutely brilliant on stage and to pick up a little bit of their magic. So those are the general things that I want to highlight in terms of the value of liberal arts as a way to sharpen up your education, to stretch as a student. When I wrote the book, You Can Do Anything, I think I argued more strongly for keeping liberal arts choices as majors. The world keeps changing, and I think it is a harder path with a degree in English or French than it was 25 years ago. But that doesn't mean even if you end up majoring in economics or biology or the other fields we saw on the list, that you shouldn't have some exposure to those classes. So anytime I get a chance to talk to someone who's looking at their college choices, I encourage them to look for a couple of these classes. And just to make it personal, um, let me talk about 3 classes I took freshman year and how they played out in my life. Excuse me. So the first was a freshman seminar on the Bill of Rights. Again, a marvelous introduction to America's legal system, to Supreme Court reasoning, but also, and this is really valuable, it was the one class in my freshman year where we were such a small group that we could talk, we could debate, we could not just develop our ability to bubble in the right answers on multiple choice tests or to solve posed problems within the time span of an exam, but to actually think and to sense that feeling of what happens when the rest of the room is not buying my argument. And where do I go from here? Do I back down? Do I reiterate my position? Do I look for a way to modify my position? These are life skills. And I'm grateful to Lois Amsterdam, the professor, for teaching them. They've stuck with me a long time. The second one was a class on Dostoevsky. And like many high school students, I'd read Crime and Punishment in high school. I thought he was a pretty cool author. And I wanted to see what else he wrote. Uh, I walked into an upper division class where the answer was, you're going to read pretty much everything that he's ever written. Those of you who don't have Russian can read it in translation. Those of you who do have Russian can read it in the original. And I remember on day 2 thinking, I'm not going to get an A in this class. I may not get a B in this class, but at least it'll stretch me. And the stretching was really wonderful. It was my first exposure to a giant body of work that I had to distill, and not just distill once, but distill into something that was maneuverable that I could then build up into what was ultimately going to be my long-term paper. And I thought about that class many times when I tried to write my first book. And there again, I was looking at a huge field. I was doing something much more ambitious, and it was a struggle to get that done. It came out very well in the end, but it was 3 years of sweat and some tears along the way. I don't think I would have had the mental framework or the skills to do it without that Dostoevsky class. And then the third one was a class on Reconstruction, the period immediately after the Civil War when briefly the United States opened up opportunities for Black Americans post-slavery, and then that ultimately got squashed. And what really stood out with me, one, the subject itself is valuable, and American history always circles back to what did we learn from Reconstruction? What were we able to do? Why weren't we able to do more? I mean, it's a period in history that illuminates the present day again and again. So for its own merits, it was great. But it also introduced me to a world where history wasn't what I was taught in high school, where there was one basic version and there were known names and known dates and that sort of thing. Bear with me a sec. What the class really stood out for was this awareness that there were 2 schools of history. There was the Denning School, which was basically a white supremacist version of Reconstruction, in which the Klan was forgiven for whatever it did or was seen as a useful force, in which Black achievements were minimized. And then there was the revisionist school, which went back to the same documents, or more correctly, the same pool of documents, and picked out ones that showed that Black leadership in Reconstruction worked a whole lot better than the Dunning School ever was willing to concede, and that the oppression of Black citizens was much more severe. It really gave you a whole different view on that period in history. And that was enduringly useful to me um, as a way of realizing sometimes there are two sides to something, and it's your job as a historian or as a journalist or as a public speaker or in whatever role you are to weigh the two, to understand why there are differences, and to synthesize something that doesn't just say, well, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, but that really does the analytical work to decide why one school is the one that makes sense and why the other one is not. So, as a way to learn analytical skills, invaluable. I would not have been able to move on to prize-winning journalism and to popular books that sold well and remain in print decades later if I had not had the grounding from Professor Don Fehrenbacher of how to think about a really challenging, nuanced issue, how to get down to the source documents, how to keep your brain on the whole time. So marvelous classes. And again, as is so often the case with the liberal arts, these end up being parables or paradigms. These are areas where you don't just learn the literal content of the class, but you take away from it the kinds of skills you'll need in analyzing all kinds of other related fields. So let me move to the third area, what employers want. And now I'm going to borrow a little bit from the LinkedIn playbook. Within the last month or two, LinkedIn has published a list of the fastest growing jobs in the United States. And I've split it in two. The original list goes number 1 to number 25, but I've reassembled it. So on the left-hand side, you see the fastest growing STEM jobs. And on the right-hand side, you see the fastest growing non-technical jobs. And let's take a look. Surprise, surprise, AI engineer and AI consultant are number 1 and 2. We are in the midst of an enormous boom of what artificial intelligence hopes to do, some of which it's already capable of doing, some of which is still over the horizon. But whether you're a top to bottom AI fan or an AI skeptic, or where I am, which is constantly surprised both by how good it is at some things and how raw and inexperienced it is at others, it's a great job area. But it's not the only one. So within the STEM side, we need bridge engineers, we need nuclear engineers, we need a lot of nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, people who can deliver much of the value of a primary care doctor, but do it in a way that's more economically efficient. But then if we roll over to the other side, non-technical jobs on the rise, physical therapist, travel advisor. This amazes me. I was writing about Web 1.0 for the Wall Street Journal in 1998, 1999. And this was when Expedia and Travelocity were coming on strong. It seemed that we were never going to need travel agents again. We could all book our own tickets. But mercy, what do we have now? Essentially, the old travel agent reborn as the travel advisor. And in a world with so many choices, people are willing to pay a human being to help guide them through where should I go? What should I do when I get there? I'm now coming across people who want to do their first African safari. Um, if that's what you want to do, there's no end of countries you can go to and experiences you can have. And the Travelocities and the Expedias aren't really the way that people want to do it. They want to have hand holding and a human contact. And this is a theme I've written on before. Even though tech enables us to do so many things, we still value what people can do. So in fact, let's look at the next couple on the list. Event coordinator. Anytime you go to an event, hopefully it's a wonderful event and everyone registers well and the food is good and the speakers are great and there's room in the hallways to mingle. That does not happen by accident. There are people who are well paid and well valued who make those events come together. And that's something that you can't automate. You need problem solvers, you need planners with enough originality to come up with an event that feels fresh. And that's been a growing field for a long time. Sales reps, same thing. There's a lot of stuff that we buy off the web, but there are a bunch of things that we really want to be sold. That's certainly true for a lot of enterprise software. Um, Pharmaceutical companies still find that you can advertise all you want, you can put up websites, but a lot of doctors' practices, in terms of what they prescribe and what they'll consider prescribing, depend on that chance to talk it over with a sales rep. Um, excuse me. Sustainability specialist, again, that's a field where uh, it's new enough, the data is coming in from enough different directions. You need people there. Community planners. And half of community planning is figuring out where your community is in terms of what it's willing to accept. It's easy to model up that, small park in the median, but you have to figure out is the community ready for that? So again, very much a hands-on, non-technical job that requires the sorts of social skills and reading the room that are so critical. Grants consultants, philanthropy, for all of the ability to click on a GoFundMe, um, we still find that larger giving is done person to person, hand to hand, and there's a lot of the human touch there. So um, you can find the full list on LinkedIn if it's one that interests you. It goes 1 to 25, but I've given you a sense of some of the highlights. And to sum up, on the tech side, obviously AI is big, but there's a lot of demand for traditional engineering too. On the non-technical side, people who can talk to people are always going to be in demand. I did a piece some years ago about the rise of the empathy economy, and I will still contend that there are a lot of jobs where if you can connect with the person on the other side of the table, you have valuable skills that will never get automated away. So, in fact, this is a chart that I did in You Can Do Anything. I took 5,000 ads on Indeed that said companies are looking for critical thinking. And I go, okay, critical thinking is one of these common phrases that's cherished as a definition of what the liberal arts means. It's a phrase that academics like more than the rest of us. It carries great meaning to them. To me, what means critical, what means thinking. So I go, let me see if I can come up with a better definition. And I peeled through the ads and did a little bit of text analysis to help me along. And I find that really, if you're specializing in a non-technical field beyond what you're literally learning, there are 5 areas where you're picking up skills and insights that will be valuable in the rest of your career. So, area number 1, I call it working on the frontier, and that's ability to do something new. So, in fact, when I did the book, blockchain was becoming prominent, as it still is. And I had an example of IBM, which had hired a political science major to do its blockchain work. And I was sharing this with a technical audience in Santa Clara, and I was offering it as a little bit of a extreme example. And there was a guy from I believe it was Intel who said, we did the exact same thing, and we picked a history major to do it. Because the field was so new and so different. They wanted someone with that lateral thinking and that curiosity and that ability to tackle an area where it's all new. Second area, finding insights. I referenced this a little bit with my Dartmouth Classics example. That ability to pore over documents, to figure out what's fresh, to distill knowledge, super valuable. Third area is, selectivity, knowing what to do with those insights and how to choose the right approach. Sounds easy to say, but I'm sure anyone who's worked in, whether it's the nonprofit world or the for-profit world, you know the difference between being around a manager who has excellent decision-making skills and one who sends you down projects that don't work. Fourth area, this is maybe the most critical. I call it reading the room. It's an sense of what other people are about, where their attitudes are, and sort of that ability to meet your audience where it is, meet your customers where they are. If you're a principal, meet your teachers where they are, knowing what their capacity for change is, what's central to them, what ways to appeal to them, what are Is this an audience that's motivated by ambition to change the world? Is this an audience that's motivated by making their days a little simpler? Um, it's valuable in almost any leadership role. And then the final one is inspiring others. And that comes back to a little bit of what I showed you on the freshman seminar. That was our chance to learn how to be persuasive, how to touch people in a way that wasn't just a reading of facts. And all of these are valuable skills. They're ones you can put to work in all kinds of settings. So I would offer these as the 5 things that a rounded college education can do for you. Landing a good internship or job. We're such a big audience that I'm not able to do a show of hands here, which is a pity. But if I were to ask you how many of you have sons or daughters who are trying to figure out what they're going to do this summer in terms of a summer job or internship or whatever, I would guess a good share of the room, your hands would be up. And to peel it down to its basics, there are 2 ways for you to improve your odds. One is to have really great skills. The other is to have a really good network. Skills is outside the scope of this talk. I'm being hosted by a terrific high school system, and that is something that I leave to the educators to define what the core skills are. But there's a lot I can say about networking. I mean, after all, the place I worked for 6 years has built its entire business on networking. And this little schematic that shows the 5 people coming off of the 1 person, LinkedIn is now up to 1.1 billion people. So the schematic would be gigantic. But it's a marvelous place to look at what kinds of relationships people have, what their close ones are, what their loose ones are. And relationships matter. Anytime I talk about networking, there's a portion of my audience that gets, at the very least, hesitant and in some cases outright nauseous. There's a perception that networking is for extroverts. It's for people who really like being in the cocktail party and like going from person to person in those loud, noisy rooms. I don't. There's a 6-year-old introvert in the middle of me, and I've been socialized enough that I can do public events without too much trouble. But still, I think for anyone who still feels I don't want to be on stage, what do I do? So thus the completely goofy art of someone in heaven knows what. So what do you do if networking feels really awkward? I'm glad I asked that question of myself, and let's take a shot at it. So one of the things that I share with students is a reminder that their network is bigger than we realize. For a lot of teenagers, obviously, it's mom and dad's network that's immediately useful. And in our own family, that led to a couple of job opportunities. But in other cases, our kids have found their own jobs themselves. And what's your network? It starts with alumni from your college. And I never cease to be impressed by how much alumni are willing to do to help someone who's gone to their school 10 years later or 20 years later. There's a connection that sort of goes beyond logic and just speaks to that desire to feel that in the same way that the school opened doors for you, you can open doors for other people. So that's a starting point. People from your hometown. I share this especially with people from unusual hometowns, but big hometowns too. It can open doors. Clubs and volunteer work. These are great ways to meet people, to get connected. People with ties to anything else. If you've done Outward Bound, if you've done a gap year, if you've built houses for Habitat for Humanity, these are ways to connect. If you're active on social media, that can open doors. I've seen aspiring music critics put their work up and get recognized. I certainly see that for journalists. My former boss at LinkedIn had this saying that publishing is the new resume. And if you make your work visible, that will get you job offers. I think that's really only true for a handful of what I'm going to call the performing arts, but it's very relevant there. And I think it's a great way to connect with the outside world. And then anyone who's intrigued by your social media presence, that in the past 15 years, I've seen the thinking go from you can only make a fool of yourself on social media. If you're serious about job hunting, you should scrub everything, to a much more relaxed attitude that, one, the people who are interviewing you probably went to parties and did stupid things too. So you're less likely to be chastised for that. But also, a lot of what shows up does speak to your energy, your imagination. Certainly, anyone trying to get a job in social media, and that's a marvelous entry point for people in their teens and 20s. The fact that you're on social media is a plus, not a minus. Next question, why would busy people spend time with me? And the slide sort of speaks for itself, but all of these are things that I think hesitant people in their mid-teens, late teens, sometimes undersell themselves. They don't realize how many people who are farther than them on the career ladder are still very willing to lend a helping hand. And what are the reasons for this? The first one is older people see you as a younger version of themselves. Even the most powerful people were 19 years old once upon a time. They were trying to figure out the world. And the chance to have a do-over and share their lessons with you is actually kind of intoxicating. People like to do that. The other is well-written outreach notes or requests. And one of the things I find in my line of work, I always appreciate people who've read some of my work and have a serious question about it. And it can be a critical question of why didn't you include this? Or don't you think this point of view is out of date? I don't mind that. Discernment is a win. I enjoy the conversation. Adoration, at least for me, doesn't work as much. I get enough praise in the world, and sometimes it's kind of embarrassing. But having someone simply come up and say, "Oh, you must be wonderful," I'd much rather have a conversation as peers. So don't hesitate, and encourage your teenagers and emerging adults to bring their discernment. We like to hear from the younger generation, and we don't mind being challenged every now and then. The next two reasons are pretty obvious. If you've got unique skills to offer, that's a great way to put yourself in the market. If you come recommended, that's a big plus. And that's clearly something where parents' recommendations can be valuable, but also teachers, other people camp counselors, there's no end of people. Excuse me. And then finally, you're entertaining. And I put that last, but I would not leave it off the list. Sometimes it's just fun to hear from someone who's half my age or less. And I think being willing to bring your whole personality, there's enough of the workday that's kind of boring and obligatory and familiar. And encountering someone with a lot of energy and a little bit of naivety brightens up the day. So I realize a lot of these methods appeal more to people who are outgoing. And I'm hoping someday to do a different version of the book that will speak more toward what introverts can do. A lot of the examples in my book do involve people with an outgoing side. But if you're able even just to summon that up for 20 minutes, it can make a big difference. Okay, these are slides that I traditionally show when I'm doing a longer talk about careers. I see we have more than 40 questions already, and Q&A is my favorite part of talks, and you've gone to the trouble of coming to this. So I will try and condense the finish so that we have a little more time for Q&A. It's a fine slide, but we'll skip it. This is an image that I always like, that, college seminar on the lawn is actually a pretty close approximation of what you'll do in the workplace. So when you're thinking, wow, we're just sitting here in jeans on the grass, how can this relate to work? The answer is the back and forth actually does. Okay, and then I want to close with a little bit on what is success. And we live in a very competitive community. There's a lot of success in your zip code and my zip code and all the zip codes around. And some of that translates into high personal income. It translates into high SAT scores. It translates into a lot of sort of success badges that they're not irrelevant, but I think all of us feel deep down there's something more than just, biggest house wins, largest, seed valuation for your startup wins. There's more to the world than that. So I want to offer two resources. The first, PayScale, has a really interesting tool on their site, and they look at not just what the earnings are for college majors, but what percent of people with those degrees say, I'm in this field because I believe I can make the world better. And depending on what your students are thinking of doing, it's worth a 10-minute visit. And you'll sometimes be surprised on fields that, there's some that hit the magic spot, that they pay well and they provide a great chance to accomplish good things. There's some that deliver only one. And I think especially in communities like this where people do have meaningful resources, I've seen with our own kids, when they're in a field that they love, it really doesn't matter near as much what they're getting paid as when they're in a field that they hate. And then there's no amount of money that can turn it into a good job. So I'm seeing some hearts go up on this one. I'm glad to have shared it with you. And then I want to close with a little energy. So here we go. I used to spend a lot of time on Quora. I ended up being a top writer on Quora for a few years, which I don't know if it had anything to do with the quality of my answers, but it probably had to do with the volume. I put up thousands of Quora answers. What can I say? It was my hobby. But I want to share one that came in that really intrigued me, and then I'll share what I wrote in response. You can read the slide itself, but just to cover it. Question: I'm 18 years old and starting my undergraduate schooling at Stanford in the fall. What should I study and involve myself in if I want to work in the front office at a hedge fund after I finish my undergraduate degree? That one got under my skin. And if I were a more measured person, I would have just left it to myself. But I went to the keyboard and I started typing. And here's what I typed out. Oh, for heaven's sake, if you got into Stanford, try to get more out of the university than just 4 years of narrowly defined trade school. If you're interested in global macro themes, take some world history classes. If momentum investing intrigues you, get over to the philosophy department and take as much epistemology as your brain can stand. If you see yourself as a quant, get the computer science department to let you peek at the frontiers of machine learning. In your spare time, make friends with at least a couple of varsity athletes. Your incoming class is likely to include a couple Olympic champions, and your freshman dorm might even include the next Andrew Luck or Tiger Woods. Study their approaches to life. They can teach you competitive insights that finance class never covers. Stretch your personal horizons too. If you make it in the hedge fund business, you will be very rich someday, so you might as well start developing expensive tastes. Take an art history class. Visit Hawaii on break. For that matter, take a screenwriting class. Learn something you can about suspension of disbelief and how the masters pull it off. Message me if you don't see the connection to investing, but I'll bet you do. In general, live life with gusto. Live as if your future depended on it. And that is my all-purpose 2-minute advice to anyone who's going, what can I get out of college? That concludes everything that I prepared. I would love to hear your questions. And I think Charlotte has figured out how to scroll through the chat and find the questions, and she'll be sending yours to me, and then I'll try and offer succinct and hopefully useful answers.
There we go.
Okay.
Well, thank you, George. That was splendid. That was a great ending. College is not trade school. Trade school has its place and it's great, but that's different. Look at all those hearts. See, people agree with us. All right. George, questions. Here's one. What advice do you have for students who feel pressure to pursue STEM majors despite their passion for humanities or social science?
So you can probably keep mom and dad happy by becoming a product manager, becoming a user experience people. When I worked at LinkedIn, my favorite PM was an English major. So even if you're getting sweated of, your career should be in STEM, there are a lot of non-technical opportunities at the big tech companies. So that's one way to split the difference. Mom and dad are paying for tuition, so you can't ignore them. But at the same time, it's possible to have a great career at a STEM organization in a STEM adjacent job that still lets you be yourself and study what you want. And if you're going to get interviewed by product managers who are English majors, they will understand your world.
Okay, fair enough. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people want to know about liberal arts degrees and career success? Is it possible?
Yes, it very much is. One of the things that startled me, and at first it annoyed me, but now I'm just going to run around. All of the political leaders who are most anti-liberal arts went to elite schools and majored in liberal arts. I think, Marco Rubio was either a government or psychology major. I could go through the list, but there's hypocrisy there. These are good fields. These let you go on to great things. And I think there's been some rhetoric in an effort to pick up blue collar votes in the political system, disparaging higher education. I wish people wouldn't do that. There are other ways to win an election. But it's if you're wondering, can I get a good job with a liberal arts degree? Yes, you absolutely can. Can I live a good life? Yes, you absolutely can.
Well, I know that my daughter graduated with a human bio degree, but then many of her friends in the liberal arts ended up at places like Google and Facebook where they really wanted people who could write and express themselves. And I know that that need is still growing. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. The 1, 2 through 5 list of being able to read the room, being able to inspire people. These are skills that you're going to pick up from the kinds of fields we're discussing, where there is more synthesis, research, and it's not just a matter of bubbling in the right answers. So I don't think those skills will ever go out of style.
Well, and I'm really glad that you mentioned introverts and how this can look like an extrovert's world, George, because it's really important. Parents, I want you to know that I've sat in lots of, parenting things just like George, where you're out of college and they're talking to you about what they should do. And inevitably, the counselors say, we sit here during office hours alone. We really like kids. And I think in high school, don't you think if kids can start talking to counselors, then when it's time to write about them, they will know them better, no matter whether they're introverted or extroverted.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think a lot of counselors who care make that extra effort to connect with the quiet student. And that's sometimes where a few words of advice can be so valuable. And I would double down and say the same thing goes for the career services department. And I ended up doing a lot of talks for career services groups. And the thing I kept hearing was we have people come in April of senior year going, I need to find a job. What can you do? And they go, if only you'd come in a year earlier. We could have introduced you to internship possibilities. We could have talk through ways that your clubs would show well on the resume. So there you do, at the private schools, you can get one-on-one meetings or very small groups. At the bigger state schools, it tends to be a little more depersonalized, but that is time well spent. And I would encourage people in the same way that your high school counselor can help you, your college career counselor can help you too.
Okay, and George, what about how do students plan today for a new world that may include jobs that we certainly don't know are coming? What advice do you have?
Uh, I think improvising is as important as planning, being open to the opportunities and also using your whole life. I've been intrigued how many people have found their hobbies have turned into careers. I mean, sample of one, but our son played far more competitive video games than I'd expected in high school. And I still remember hearing the computer on at 3 in the morning and my wife going, do you want to go down and tell him to turn it off? Oh, we just want to get our sleep. But he ended up taking a gap year and taking an esports team to the world championships in Romania, and they won $600,000. So something that I thought was a total waste of time. I was sort of stern daddy, turned out to be a pathway to something interesting. So that doesn't always work, but I would be open to the notion that the things you love may have a way to and turn into careers for you too.
That's a really great story, George. Okay, what can parents do to support their students in choosing a major that aligns with their interest while also thinking about future job security? Any advice?
So people declare majors at different stages at school. I know actually Pomona has a beautiful habit where you declare your major at the end of sophomore year, even though you've probably been working toward it. And they have a dinner where they bring in alumni who had that major, and you sit at round tables of 6 or 8 people, and you hear from the alumni, here's what I did with my major. So one, you build up a really nice network, but also you get a lot of advice and opening up of horizons. I wish larger schools would do the same thing too. But I come back to this notion that alumni are a powerful force. One advancement trick that I just want to share because it's short. If you're involved in any club, um, become the person who lines up the outside speakers, because then you will meet them, you will, introduce them, and they will be your new best friend, and you will have a marvelous contact. And because you brought them to campus, hopefully they'll do some good for all of the students. But that is a way to nab the inside track.
Really, really interesting idea because again, event planning was on your list of really important up and coming careers.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that you can do well at age 22. I mean, you'll do more than stack chairs. You're going to, figure out how the program works and, book the speakers and everything. But that's also a life skill that you can translate. That and video editing are two things that employers never have enough people on. I've certainly seen, positions, and can you edit videos? So that's a super nice to have skill.
Thank you for that. So, George, in your book, you mentioned storytelling, the power of storytelling. We hear a lot about that today. Um, how can students craft narratives about their education and experience that can be useful in their job search?
So a little writing trick that's helped me, I found often 3 hours at the keyboard are equivalent to 5 minutes of leaning over a partition and talking to someone. And you'll know how your story works by telling it to people. And pick an assortment of people. Start with someone safe who's not going to be critical, but just try, telling it out loud. The hero's journey is always a fallback. I know 2/3 of all movies rely on it, but what's the quest? What was the obstacle? How did you overcome the obstacle? And in fact, when you get taught the STAR method of answering interview questions, it's similar. So, as you tell your story, try and, identify what's my goal? What did I want to accomplish? Why was it hard? And then how did I dig deep and manage to get that done anyway?
I'd really love that. So, everybody, we would come pretty much to the end of our hour together, but I want to say George's book, You Can Do Anything, is incredibly relevant. And I really suggest you pick it up. Plus, he's a writer, so it's wonderfully written and really compelling. Lots of ideas that you can bring to your kids. Because today we sort of tried to structure this around what can parents do to support their students, because it really is their journey, and we want them to have their own journey. So, George, what are some final closing thoughts for us tonight?
So the simplest thing I want to get in, I enjoy connecting with people coming out of these events. Half the reason I do them is to, develop the kinds of relationships or even just to be a resource. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then also my email is george.anders@gmail.com. And within reason, I'm happy to take questions, thoughts, if they're personal things that you want to share. That'd be terrific.
Okay, I appreciate that. There's people saying, can you come talk to our community? We have lots of immigrants. Is LinkedIn still owned by Microsoft? Yes, no.
Yes, LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. They've mostly been a good owner, except for the time when they said, it's nice that you've been enjoying Zoom, but you really need to appreciate the beauty of Teams. And
Uh,
I'm, what can I say?
Guilty as charged. Should a teenager, a high school student, have a LinkedIn by the time they're seniors?
Um, Somewhere along the way, you should. I actually met with someone who wanted to create LinkedIn profiles for 13-year-olds, and I went to my boss and he said, that is the worst idea I've ever heard. Don't don't start too early. Have a childhood, have a life. You don't need to, talk about your 6 deliverables running the lemonade stand. That's just inappropriate. But as you start to get summer jobs, they don't have to be fancy jobs. In fact, if you look at Jensen Huang's LinkedIn profile, the CEO of NVIDIA, who is worth an ungodly amount of money and has changed the world, he lists a couple very blue collar jobs that he had early on. I think, clearing tables at a restaurant. And he does it just because he can. He's sort of pranking the world. But um, an awful lot of people worked at McDonald's as teenagers. Jeff Bezos worked at McDonald's as teenagers. That shouldn't be the only thing on your CV, but if you're building websites for people, if you've created a few Wikipedia pages, if you've done something that's teenage appropriate, but also a little bit relevant for the work, I would say somewhere between 16 and 20, you could think about doing it, but don't feel you have to rush. It'll still be there for you when you graduate.
Okay, well, listen, thank you everybody for being such a great audience. All the love. This is where we really do like technology, all those floating hearts. Thank you so much, George Anders, for a wonderful conversation. Thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight. A quick survey is going to pop up. We hope you'll take 10 seconds to answer 4 questions. But again, huge thank you to you, George Anders, and to our sponsors, the Fremont Union High Schools Foundation. Thank you, everybody. Take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.